Okay, so in the first model we're going to think about, where discrimination is actually going to be required by a competitive labor market rather than be eliminated by a competitive labor market, is a statistical discrimination model. And what we mean when we talk about statistical discrimination is that there's contexts in which even if somebody's membership in a group, like a race or a gender group, isn't directly important to me as an employer, that is, I don't have any direct prejudices against black workers versus white workers, or women versus men, or Hispanic workers versus Asian workers, there's other things that I do care about, other characteristics that I do care about, that are statistically associated with membership in that group. Which is to say, if I know somebody's race, it might improve my ability to guess other characteristics about that person. And if those other characteristics matter to the worker's productivity, it'll be in my best interests to use the information that I get from their race or their gender to judge their likelihood of being productive. So to think about this, let's think about a fairly simple example where I'm a recruiter for a company that sells yachts. So I'm trying to find yacht salespeople, and my goal is to hire people who are likely to sell a yacht, right? And I want to offer them a wage that is commensurate with their likelihood of being able to be productive in my business, which means their ability to sell a yacht. So with each of my workers, right, I can get access to various sorts of information that they put on their resume, right? Maybe I know where they went to college, I know their GPA, I know their previous work experience, but the one piece of information that I don't have that would be very useful if I wanted to know someone's likelihood of being able to sell a yacht is how many rich friends they're likely to have. In other words, someone who knows a lot of rich people, who has a lot of rich friends, is more likely to know somebody who's looking for a yacht and be able to sell a yacht to them than somebody who doesn't have any rich friends, right? So we could say, for example, that if you have a rich friend, you have an 80% chance, or a 4 in 5 chance, of making a sale. And if you don't have a rich friend, your chance of making a sale is just 20%, right? Or is just 1 in 5. So whether or not you have a rich friend is going to be a really, really important determination of whether I want to hire you to work on my yacht sales force. On top of this, let's imagine that your likelihood of having a rich friend varies based on race. So let's say I've got some white applicants and I've got some black applicants, and my white applicants are significantly more likely to have a rich friend than my black applicants. Let's just say that 3 out of 4 white applicants have a rich friend, whereas only 1 out of 4 black applicants does. So if we think about this, right, we can make a little table here. Right, with white and black applicants. Whether they've got a rich friend or not. And then we want to be able to say, based on what we know about your likelihood of having a rich friend, by judging you by your race, what can we learn about your likelihood of making a sale successfully? And we said that white applicants have a 3 in 4 chance of making a sale, of having a rich friend. Black applicants have a 1 in 4 chance, which means then 1 in 4 and 3. So if you're a white applicant and you've got a 3 in 4 chance of having a rich friend, and applicants with a rich friend have a 4 in 5 chance of making a sale, your likelihood of making a sale is going to be your probability of making a sale if you have a rich friend, plus your probability of making a sale if you don't have a rich friend, right? Weighted by the likelihood of these two events. So we're going to say this expected value is going to be 3/4 times 4/5 plus 1/4 times 1/5, right? Which is going to be 12/20 plus 1/20 is a 13 in 20 chance of making a sale if you're a white applicant, right? Whereas if you're a black applicant, your expected likelihood of making a sale, right, is going to be your probability of having a rich friend times the number of sales you'd make if you have a rich friend, plus your probability of not having a rich friend times the number of sales if you don't have a rich friend, So 1 and 4 times 4 and 5 plus 3 and 4 times 1 and 5. Right? So this is going to be 4/20ths plus 3/20ths is just 7/20ths. So what we're learning is, if all we know about our applicants, if we don't know whether they have a rich friend or not, but we know their race, we're going to be able to fairly accurately, we're going to learn a lot about their likelihood of selling a yacht by judging them based on their race, right? And let's say that selling a yacht is going to earn a company, let's say $100,000, or let's say $200,000, right? So let's say selling a yacht earns $200,000. We're going to want to pay a white applicant $200,000 times 13/20 is $130,000, and black applicants will only earn $70,000, right? So if we're just trying to pay people based on what they're going to produce for us, right? If we're thinking about the maximum amount we're willing to pay for different kinds of workers, we're going to be willing to pay white applicants significantly more than we'd be willing to pay black applicants. And if instead of being able to offer different wages to different people, let's say that we were going to offer a wage of $100,000 to anyone we thought was going to sell enough yachts to justify that, we would end up with a hiring policy of only hiring white applicants. Now, there's a couple things I want to point out about this. The first thing is, in the model we just laid out, if you have a rich friend, your race has no effect whatsoever on your productivity. And likewise, if you don't have a rich friend, your race has no effect whatsoever on your productivity. So this isn't a model where we're going to say that race in a fundamental sense matters. Rather, we're going to say race is associated with something that matters. And what that means is that if the yacht company was able to tell whether you had a rich friend or not, they wouldn't care anymore about your race, right? They would just hire people with rich friends and not hire anyone without rich friends. So they're using race as an indicator or a signal of something else that they care about. I also want to spend a minute thinking about the ethical implications of this model. So the first thing we might want to think about is, do we want to call this sort of race-based discrimination, right, offering higher wages to white workers than black workers because we expect them to be more productive? Do we want to call that a form of prejudice or not, right? Do we want to say that employers are prejudiced against black workers in this context? And the answer is it's kind of hard to say, right? If we want to say that prejudice is about essentially having negative perceptions or opinions of one group of people relative to another, it's accurate to say that the employer in this context has a negative perception of black workers relative to white workers, right? They perceive black workers to be less likely to have rich friends and therefore less likely to sell yachts. The issue is, in this model, those negative perceptions are based on evidence, right? Those negative perceptions are going to be borne out when the employer actually observes the productivity of different kinds of workers. So we can't quite say that somebody has sort of a psychological issue called prejudice, right? They're going to learn based on evidence. So another way to think about this is, let's say that we didn't have a human making this decision at all. Let's say that you coded up a machine learning algorithm that was going to take all of the statistical data that you could throw at it about applicants, see which applicants were successful and which applicants weren't successful, and make job offers based purely on the past evidence, the past performance of other workers. In this model, in this context, the computer program doesn't have any preconceptions about white versus black workers, right? It's just another variable in its data set. But the computer program would still end up discriminating against black workers and in favor of white workers. And the reason is, discriminating in that way is going to help it make better predictions about somebody's likely productivity. So we can think of this as, in some sense, being a function of prejudice, right? An employer might not know why they are preferring black workers or white workers to black workers, right? They might have all sorts of ideas about where this difference is coming from that we would call bigoted. But we're going to say that because this is borne out by evidence, we can't quite eliminate this sort of negative discrimination against black workers or positive discrimination towards white workers by changing people's attitudes. People have the attitudes that maximize their profits. Another thing to think about here is to ask the question of whether we should really think about statistical discrimination as discrimination. In other words, Are we going to look at this and say, oh, this isn't really discrimination, this isn't really prejudice, this is just about maximizing profits? Or are we going to look at this and say, no, we're judging people based on their race, we're making different decisions based on people's race, and that is bigoted, right? Or that is discriminatory. I think what we should say is that yes, this sort of discrimination, statistical discrimination, is discrimination, right? We have a belief in our society that judging people on the basis of characteristics like race or sex or gender identity or things like this is wrong because of the fact that it robs people of their individuality, right? Because of the fact that it means that we're going to treat people as representatives of their group averages, groups that they are not joining out of preference or voluntarily, but groups that are imposed on them by society. And that's something that we want to eliminate in society. This sort of statistical discrimination is a way of judging people on the basis of their membership in a group. One nuance in this, which we'll talk about more when we look at some empirical evidence on statistical discrimination, is that if all we observe in this context is that white workers are offered higher salaries on average than black workers, we couldn't actually tell whether that's because employers are making judgments on people, about people based on their race, or if employers actually can tell who has a rich friend and who can't, and we just don't realize that as a researcher. Right? If that second thing was true, if the employers can tell who has a rich friend and who can't, they're going to offer people with rich friends higher incomes than people without rich friends, and that's going to end up resulting in white workers being offered higher incomes than black workers. Okay, great. Thank you so much.